Foundation. And myself and two other at-large members from the community round out the committee. They are Dr. Sarah Traynor-Boyce and Graham Durovich. The committee has been working with Vince Murphy, the town's coastal resilience coordinator, and the consulting team of Arcadis, Stoss, One Architecture, and the Craig Group to develop a coastal resilience plan for Nantucket. During tonight's open house, the public will get a chance to look at some concepts and join the conversation about whether these might be appropriate for Nantucket. None of the alternatives being shown tonight are final proposals. Despite the difficulties imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is committed to delivering the Coastal Resilience Plan this fall, just slightly more than 2 years after beginning work. Tonight's event is an opportunity for the public to participate, and we hope that people will continue to actively engage in the process. For more background on the committee and the Coastal Resilience Plan, please visit the town's website, which you can reach by the shortcut resilienceack.org. Other resilience efforts have been underway over the last 2 years. These include Resilient Nantucket for Adaptation project, which provides guidelines and information for homeowners of historic properties to sensitively and appropriately adapt their buildings to flooding. Also, Remain Nantucket's Envision Resilience Nantucket Challenge, which requested creative ideas for the downtown waterfront from selected university students, and their projects will be on display at the Thomas Macy Warehouse beginning in July. The Land Bank, the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, and the trustees of reservations are also examining coastal resilience options for some of their properties, and the group Acclimate, formed as a consortium of organizations, including the town, Remain, and several local nonprofit groups, all invested in working together on solving the challenges the island faces from climate change. Once again, thank you to all the presenters and to all the attendees for joining tonight.
Thank you, Mary. Excellent. And as you can tell, there is a lot going on and a lot of people who are involved in conversations around climate change and coastal resilience on Nantucket. And we're very happy to be here tonight to contribute to and continue that conversation. So with that, I'm going to jump into our first presentation. Could somebody just let me know that they can see the right screen with the presentation slide before I jump forward?
Yes, looks good.
All right, excellent. Thank you. So welcome to everybody again. Thank you for being here. Sorry, excuse me. Thank you everyone for being here. We're very excited to be here tonight. My name is Trevor Johnson. If I haven't introduced myself, or for those who don't know me, I'm a senior resilience planner with Arcadis, and we're the firm that's been leading this work, as Mary just mentioned. I serve as the project manager. We're joined here by the rest of our consultant team, and you'll have an opportunity to chat with many of them later during our breakout workshops from Stoss, One Architecture, and the Craig Group. We've been working with the town and many community members over the last 9 months and look forward to discussing our progress here tonight. So before we begin, just a little bit about how tonight's open house will work. Because we're gathered virtually, we need to pay attention to a couple important technical matters that will ensure that you have a positive experience with us. First of all, the chat function is enabled, and we do encourage you to introduce yourself and ask questions during the presentation. We will record those questions and be happy to discuss those with you during the breakouts. Second, we do have over an hour allocated for discussion later in this presentation, and we very much want you to stay with us during that time. It's the crux of our conversation here tonight. But with that, please do reserve any questions for those workshop discussions. And third, we hope that this presentation goes smoothly, but if for any reason our presentation cuts off or abruptly ends for any reason, please just be patient. You can rejoin using the same link that you used to join right now. And you should also receive shortly after, if anything does occur, an email with instructions for rejoining. So now just a little bit about tonight's agenda and how the presentation will work. We'll start with a 30-minute presentation that provides an overview of the CRP and the risks facing Nantucket. We'll recap what we've heard from the community so far and talk about the resilience framework and approaches and tools that we can use to build coastal resilience across the island. This overview will set the stage for the next portion of the open house, during which we'll divide out into mini workshops to discuss preliminary strategies for different areas of the island. And these mini workshops, as I just mentioned, are really the crux of this open house. They're an opportunity for you to learn about and provide input on preliminary, non-final ideas for advancing coastal resilience. We encourage everyone joined here to stay for those breakouts and participate in that interactive discussion. It's really the heart of the conversation, and we really are interested in what you have to say. A quick note, the session tonight is being recorded, as well as the breakouts. And so if you miss anything or I talk too quickly, which I apologize for in advance, all of it will be posted for you to watch at a later point on the town's website. So before we move into the presentation, let's do a couple more polls. Curious how many folks did attend our first open house back in January. And conversely, how many of you may be joining us for the first time? All right, I think most people have voted here. Yeah, so as we can see, it's actually surprisingly a pretty even split. So really glad to see many of you back again, and excited to update you. For those of you who didn't attend the first open house, don't worry, we're going to provide a quick update on sort of where we've been and what the Coastal Resilience Plan is before diving into the more detailed discussion. Oh, apologies. There's the results for everybody. So as you can see, about an even split.
I'm gonna head out.
Oh. And then the second poll is a question about how you experience Nantucket. So we're interested in knowing, whether you live here year-round, whether you live here seasonally, whether you work here but live off island, whether you're a visitor, or if you're joining from outside of Nantucket but you care deeply about its future, that's okay too. Or if there's another category that we haven't captured here. All right, great. Why don't we end the polling and share results? So it looks like we have about a significant number of year-round residents represented here, which is wonderful to see, as well as our seasonal residents as well, and then a smattering of folks who are visitors or haven't been to the island. So it's wonderful. Thanks everybody again for joining us tonight. So what is the Coastal Resilience Plan? When we start our project with a mission statement, which many of you have probably seen before, but it's something that we carry throughout the project to kind of remind us what it is that we're doing. And this is a statement about what we're all working together to achieve and undertake together in the coastal resilience planning process. And so the mission of the Coastal Resilience Plan for Nantucket is to draw on the cherished, built, and natural environment of Nantucket and heritage of Nantucket to create a community-supported roadmap to implementation for a series of layered flood control and adaptation approaches. We look to coordinate with other ongoing adaptation and sustainability initiatives to address the whole island and county while respecting the unique characteristics of each neighborhood. Driven by the Inclusive and equitable engagement of all, the plan aspires to create social, environmental, and economic benefits and value to everyone who will share in Nantucket's future. So what is the Nantucket, or what is the Coastal Resilience Plan? For some of you, again, this will be a refresher for those who joined our first open house. For some of you, this will be a new introduction. The goal of the Coastal Resilience Plan project is to develop a comprehensive plan to address three main hazards: coastal flooding, coastal erosion, and sea level rise, which will exacerbate both coastal erosion and coastal flooding. The process includes identifying important community assets, assessing vulnerability to future flooding along the coast, identifying actions to reduce flood and erosion risk, evaluating these options, and then developing resilience and adaptation responses that are prioritized and ready to begin the process of implementation by the town, community, and other stakeholders. At key moments like tonight, we're leading community engagement events and using other types of digital tools and other public meetings to give you the opportunity to respond and reflect on the plan's findings and recommendations. We know that Nantucket is a very special place and that any recommendations for Nantucket's future must be founded in the unique conditions found across the island. For this reason, we have developed a set of principles for the project, and these are honoring the community heritage and identity through adaptation, ensuring that we are aligning the island's future with its past and the things that are most important to the community, addressing resilience at multiple scales, so thinking about all scales that matter when you ask questions about resilience, from buildings to ecological habitat to larger coastal reaches and to the island overall. We know that engaging the community in an inclusive and responsive way is vitally important towards finding solutions that are supported and will work for everyone. And then finally, bringing a commitment to implementation. We don't want a plan that will just sit on the shelf. We want to provide an actionable tool that can move into the phase of implementation immediately after the planning process is complete. Shown here is the master project schedule. Today's workshop is a critical milestone as we transition through the process of developing resilience and adaptation strategies. So far in the project, we've learned a lot by reviewing prior plans, analyzing risk, and talking to the community. Over the next 3 months, we'll be refining our ideas based on the feedback we've received tonight and in subsequent conversations to make final recommendations and start the implementation process through the final CRP document. The CRP is just the first step that outlines what needs to be done and will be followed by many more steps towards implementation around the recommended projects. It's important that everybody remain at the table and engaged throughout not only the coastal resilience planning process, but all the work that will come afterwards as well. So having set that stage about the project, let's talk a little bit about the risks that Nantucket faces. Nantucket and the people who live and work here are no stranger to the forces of the ocean. The work of planning for a resilient Nantucket must confront coastal storms that are increasing in frequency and intensity and bringing the impacts of storm surges to our front doors. Coastal erosion of our bluffs, dunes, and beaches continues to rapidly progress, which threatens homes, infrastructure, and natural resources. And sea level rise, which will drive increases in island-wide flooding and erosion over time, will exacerbate these challenges and will include flooding on sunny days, as shown in this photo here on Easy Street. Through the CRP, our team has taken a deep dive into the long-term risks facing Nantucket due to sea level rise over the next 50 years and beyond. The hazards of flooding and erosion will have consequences across the island, from Nantucket to Sconset to the South Shore and downtown. Everyone on Nantucket, regardless of where they live or work, will need to grapple with the impacts of sea level rise on the places and systems that support life on this island. Nantucket faces special challenges, as you all know, because it's an island located in the middle of the sea, and it must maintain a certain degree of self-sufficiency in order to have a resilient future. Our analysis of risks shows that the potential impacts over the next 50 years are great. For example, between now and 2070, at least 3,438 structures may be impacted by either flooding or erosion or both. The majority of these structures are residences, but many businesses are also at risk. And the risk is not just to structures, but to the value that they add to Nantucket's character. So for example, 40% of the structures that are at risk are considered historic and help define the historic character and sense of place that defines Nantucket. Similarly, nearly 7% of the structures that are at risk play a role in supporting Nantucket's vital tourism industry. All told, we could see up to $1.2 billion in cumulative damages just to structures between now and 2070, including almost 50 million to community facilities that provide essential services for the community and support quality of life. And the risks extend beyond just buildings to include transportation networks that are necessary to support travel across the island, as well as recreational facilities like parks, natural resources, and critical habitat. This is just an example, but by the end of the century, for example, nearly 50 miles of roadway could be inundated by 6+ inches of water during a monthly high tide. That's a frequency of flood event that would be extremely disruptive to everyday life on Nantucket and really impact many areas of the island, as you can tell. And the impacts will be especially hard felt on some of Nantucket's critical infrastructure, perhaps most extremely on Steamboat Wharf, which is a critical access point and supply chain support for the life on Nantucket. With sea level rise, Steamboat Wharf could be partially cut off from access roadways at monthly high tide by 2030. And by 2050, the wharf will be completely cut off from surrounding roadways by monthly high tide. This would, of course, have major impacts and consequences on the island's supply of fuel, food, household goods, and people's ability to just access the island. This is just a sampling of the findings from our risk analysis, but we do encourage you to review the mid-project summary report that was mentioned at the top by Town Manager Gibson. This includes a complete overview of the risk that we've developed through the CRP, and we'll drop a link to that in the chat right now. So why does this matter? This matters because living with water and evolving shorelines are part of what it means to spend time on Nantucket. I think we all appreciate that. But climate change is accelerating natural processes and causing storms and other events that we're not prepared for. And so we have to take action to adapt Nantucket to climate change and ensure the island is safe and resilient for future generations. And that's the purpose of the CRP, and that's why we are here tonight. So since the beginning of the project, we've been talking and learning from the Nantucket community, and we wanted to share some of what we've been hearing so far. During the conversations with the community, we've heard several key themes emerge across these categories: core values and visions, areas of concern, resilience priorities, and areas where there's openness to change. During these conversations, including the first open house, we've asked, what do you value most about living on Nantucket? And some of the major things that we discovered or heard was a strong desire to maintain Nantucket's unique character through conservation of natural and historic places and landscapes, even through the process of adaptation. We also heard that access to the water, both being able to touch and see the water, is very important, and that we shouldn't disrupt that with any adaptation approaches. When we asked what concerns you had the most as related to flooding and erosion, we heard that there were concerns around the island. Many of the responses were concentrated on 5 main areas that will be discussed later, 5 main geographic areas, I should say, that will be discussed later during this workshop and the breakouts. Some of the other concerns related to a need for greater coordination across actors and more collaboration across stakeholders to drive change, and the need for new sources of funding to implement necessary projects. And when we asked, what do you see for yourself and future generations for Nantucket? We heard a desire for continued happy, healthy, and resilient people and environments, and a need for people to stay engaged and focused on the risk, especially to critical infrastructure like Steamboat Wharf. And finally, when we asked, what would you be willing to change? What are you open to changing? We heard a tolerance for the idea of living with water, letting water in and assuming some risk, but finding ways to live with rather than keep out the water, as well as for new and amended regulations that would help advance resilient outcomes across the island. This is, again, is just a sampling of what we've heard from the community. We have a much more detailed overview of our findings from the community engagement process so far, detailed in our mid-project report. I hope many of you also filled out our pre-open house survey that was circulated. We had over 90 responses, which is wonderful to see, and really interesting responses that we wanted to share back to you for those of you who filled out the survey. Some of the main things that we saw consensus around in those responses were that the town needs to take action and prioritize public resources and critical infrastructure for investment. We noted that many folks felt that some coastal processes can't be stopped in a cost-effective manner, and so we need to be strategic about where we invest and why. We also heard that residents are very ready to invest, but they need guidance on how to do it. What should they do to make their properties and their homes more resilient? Again, historic natural resources, the downtown area, and critical infrastructure are all priorities for action. And in terms of priority projects, many indicated an interest in elevating roadways and critical transportation, developing new floodable parks to the point of living with water, and living shoreline approaches to reduce erosion. We hope you'll see many of these preferences reflected in the preliminary strategies that we'll talk about later tonight. And so now to talk about how are we going to get there? What is the coastal resilience planning process look like, and where do we stand today? So for the purpose of the CRP, resilience means more than risk reduction. We think it's important to define what we mean by resilience when we say it. And for us, it means that we think about multi-layered, multi-purpose protection. So thinking about how flood protection can provide additional value to community and quality of life beyond reducing risk. It means systems level thinking. So thinking about infrastructure in places that you rely on every day and how these places work together as part of an overall system that support quality of life on Nantucket. And how can we make these systems more resilient, not just the individual pieces in that system? It means adaptability over time. So thinking about what steps we can take today, but also how those steps can be adaptable in the future, given growing risk contexts. And then attention to equity and thinking about members of the community who are least equipped to respond and rebound when disaster strikes. The CRP will be using these approaches to define our comprehensive roadmap for Nantucket's resilience. The process of developing resilient strategies for Nantucket involves multiple steps, as outlined here. The first is establishing a vision for a resilient Nantucket. What are we trying to accomplish? The second is developing a fine-grained understanding of coastal risks and the stressors that affect the community today. These are the values that will help drive how we respond to those risks over time. And then it involves creating a resilience toolkit of approaches from structural to nature-based approaches and policy-related tools that we can use to address those risks and build resilience. And we filter all of this through a series of evaluation criteria that help us arrive at and prioritize recommended solutions. And where we are today is developing strategies and seeking input on preliminary strategies and options that we think can help advance resilience, bringing together the vision, the risk, the toolkit, and the strategies to talk about some preliminary solutions and strategies that we hope to refine with you. And one of the ways that we refine is through the evaluation criteria, and these criteria help us prioritize. We've developed a set of 5 criteria across this project. Effectiveness, so thinking about, is a strategy effective at addressing coastal risks to home, businesses, critical facilities, community assets, and infrastructure? Is it feasible? Can the strategy actually be implemented? There's a lot of ideas out there, but unless it has the technical, regulatory, funding, costs, community support, and operations and maintenance considerations that enable implementation, we don't think it has the opportunity to really build resilience in a meaningful way. Ecological and public health benefits, so thinking not just about its effectiveness at reducing risk, but also how it aligns with the health of natural and human communities over time. Equity and quality of life benefits, does the strategy improve quality of life? Does it add value for the community and visitors and help to promote community development? And then finally, value creation. Does the strategy create new opportunities for economic value in the community? And so we'll now jump to another poll, and we'd love to hear from you Among these criteria that we'll be using and discussing with you, which are most important to you? And you can, I believe you can select just one, but in terms of prioritization, which criteria is most important? All right, I think we have a good number of responses. Go ahead and share the results here. So effectiveness appears to be the highest priority, and I should say, you know, a solution doesn't just map across one of these criteria. Many solutions can be effective and have equity and quality of life benefits and have ecological and public health benefits. So it's certainly not a question of one over the other, but it is helpful to understand what is the highest priority in terms of the solutions that we might talk about later today. So then moving on, the next phase of our project after the development of strategies is implementation planning. And I just want to note this because there's a lot of work that needs to happen that we won't necessarily have the chance to talk about in great detail today, but I did want to make sure that everybody's aware that it will be happening. So thinking through conceptual designs, thinking through the kind of regulatory review, as well as potential regulatory proposals that might be necessary to implement different strategies. Cost is a very important consideration in all of this, and cost estimation will be a part of the information that we put forth through the CRP. Continued stakeholder engagement, critical to building support and helping champion projects forward, and then project prioritization. We can't do everything at once, so we need to know what's most important to do tomorrow versus 10 years from now, and so on into the future. So all of that is factored into our thinking about what we're putting forward for discussion tonight, and we'll continue to refine that thinking through the next phases of this project. It's clear that no action is off the table, and we want to talk about what are the ways that we can achieve resilience by taking action. And the actions we take can fall across a spectrum of potential approaches involving any number of resiliency tools, from protecting against flooding and erosion, to adapting to live with the sea, to retreating from the sea. A comprehensive coastal resilience strategy will likely incorporate approaches from across this spectrum that's shown on this slide here. And we'll talk more about what each of these categories means now in general, and then in more specific terms as they apply to areas of Nantucket during our breakout conversations. So protect, what we define as building with the sea. Protecting against coastal risks means implementing approaches that seek to keep water out, reduce its force, or to minimize erosion, and includes tools like flood walls, flood gates, berms, raised roadways as berms, structural measures that try to reduce the risk of flooding from happening. New infrastructure to protect from flooding and erosion can have environmental impacts. It can be very costly to implement. It has a number of potential technical challenges associated with it. So it's best suited to areas that are densely settled and have that have vulnerable critical infrastructure that needs to be protected to protect the overall resilience of the community. Adaptation to coastal risk, or adapting to coastal risk, means living with the sea, and it means implementing approaches that reduce or slow the impacts of flooding and erosion by altering buildings and infrastructure to withstand these hazards. It also includes increasing adaptive capacity through education and changes to personal and community behavior. An ADAPT approach is very broadly applicable, and I think you'll see that when we get into the breakouts. And it's applicable in places where risk occurs episodically or where a protection approach isn't desirable or feasible or cost effective. And then finally, retreating. Retreating from our coastlines means implementing policies, programmatic approaches, and other tools that manage growth in hazardous areas or that seek to relocate communities and assets from places that are very prone to flooding or erosion. Retreat can mean a lot of different things. I think it's often associated with relocation of structures or buyouts, but it can also mean increasing setbacks or limiting future density for new development in areas that may be at risk of future flood risk. And because of concerns over displacement and the impacts to the local tax base, it's very important to think about retreat very thoughtfully and make sure that it's being used in a way that is appropriate and that equity considerations are taken into account. It's also important to understand that retreat is an option in places where if we do nothing, we may have unmanaged risk that could lead to uncontrolled relocation and displacement. And so where that type of event could occur in the future, we want to make sure that we have a strategic approach that's thoughtful and that understands how risks will play out over time and how we may need to de-densify or retreat from certain areas of the coastal zone. And all of these approaches have trade-offs, and it's very important that we talk about and understand these trade-offs. So each approach has benefits, and we'll discuss benefits and costs, and we'll discuss these in the workshop discussions. Some of these trade-offs relate to cost, effectiveness, impacts on community and character, environmental impacts, and more. And so to protect the things that we love about Nantucket, we will need to make hard choices and hard decisions about the path forward. And so we'll need your help in the context of our conversations later to understand which trade-offs are acceptable and which are not. And so we've developed hypotheses that we'll present tonight about what a resilient strategy might look like for different areas of the island. These hypotheses, which build on the framework that I just presented and employ many of the tools, resilience tools that we've just discussed, are rooted in reality, and they're feasible for the area in the near term, which means the next 5 to 10 years as kind of the first step towards building resilience and addressing the near-term risks. All of them are open to discussion and course correction. We're here tonight to hear from you. Nothing is final. We'll say it again and again. And they've been informed by what we've learned so far. So think of it as, you know, we've listened, we've done a lot of analysis. And so we think we know a little bit about what might work, but now we need to test those ideas with you and hear where maybe we're off the mark or where we're heading in the right direction. And that will really be an important step along our way towards coming up with solutions that not just work well across evaluation criteria like effectiveness and feasibility, but also have the support of the community. And then I will say also that we're focusing on a couple areas, 5 areas of the island. That doesn't mean that we're not focused on the whole island. We will be developing solutions for the whole island. We're using the focus areas to structure conversation and draw out themes and trade-offs that really are representative of the island overall. And so with that, I think another call to action and to stick around with us here, we need your local knowledge and expertise to decide which of these preliminary strategies will eventually be preferred. And so I want to introduce now just some of the logistics around the mini workshops that we're going to launch into. So what we're going to cover in each of the groups is a recap of coastal risks. So we'll talk a little bit about, in a more focused focus area context, the risks from flooding and erosion that can occur and the main resilience issues that we've identified. Then we'll explore preliminary resilience strategies in each of these areas and have a discussion about the benefits of these strategies and some of the trade-offs that might be associated with them. And this is an interactive conversation throughout. So we want to have, really just a conversation about what we've come up with and where we can head next. So what will happen in a minute is that the breakout areas will open, and what you will see is a number of different workshop groups. So there are 4 different areas. Nantucket is workshop 1. Workshop 2 is focuses on Nantucket Harbor, Coatue, Pulpus Harbor, and Great Point. Workshop 3 will focus on Sconset. Workshop 4 will focus on the South Shore and Airport. And then all workshops will focus on downtown, because we feel that downtown, regardless of where you live or visit or work, downtown is really the sort of critical area of the island in terms of access and its importance to everybody's quality of life. And again, don't be alarmed if the place that you care most about is not located in one of these focus areas, because we will be developing strategies island-wide. We just feel that these focus areas are emblematic of the conditions that exist island-wide, and we can use what we learn here to apply in other areas of the island. And what will be presented in each area would be a preliminary resilience strategy. And this strategy is just one example of what resilience will look like. The slide that's, the image that's shown here is an example of a resilience framework for Nantucket, which those of you who opt to talk about Nantucket will see in much more detail. And it's been chosen to illustrate resilience issues and trade-offs that are most pertinent there. And we'll talk through that strategy in much more detail in the breakouts and take your feedback. And so you should see shortly, Anissa, if we can start to open the breakouts. What you'll see is at the bottom of your screen, an opportunity. You may have to go to the More tab